Hello, fantasy managers. My name's Tom, and you join me as I'm sweltering in the British heat. And it's not just the heat that's getting to me, it's also the stress of being a fantasy manager, I would say, because we're going into the Austria Grand Prix this weekend, and it's pretty much wide open. Fantasy, it's just kind of exploded, for want of a better expression. There's so many different options. Ferrari, a bit of a nosedive in the last couple of races, but I think they're still up there as options. Mercedes in the ascendancy, great options all of a sudden, and also pretty on the cheap side. Verstappen, Red Bull still always an option, even with Perez not performing that well. But even when, as long as he doesn't DNF, he's looking good. The constructor that is, particularly with the pit stop bonus. And you got the McLarens, Piastri again, bit of an iffy Spanish weekend, but Lando Norris just top scorer in the last 3 out of the last 4 weekends. So yes, all the top 4 constructors are all kind of punching really hard at the moment, and it's not just the top constructors; it's also the kind of the budget guys as well. We've got the rise of the Alpines. All of a sudden, they've just put themselves on our radar, and yeah, there's lots of interesting variations of teams that are going on. I've seen on Twitter, other YouTube channels, that sort of thing. So it's brilliant for the game, and this particular weekend is going to be a bit of a headache as to what we go for. We have got FP1 and Sprint qualifying for the deadline. Just a quick heads up in case you didn't know. I'm sure most of you are aware, but if you're not, the deadline will come after the Sprint qualifying. So make sure you don't make the mistake of locking in your team before then, because it's critical information. But anyway, the rest of this video is going to be made up of a couple of different segments. I have a very quick recap of what happened in Spain, as you can see on screen. We'll have the driver focus segment, and the driver focus segment this week, whatever, we'll be looking at the Alpines a bit more closely to see if they are actually as good as we think they might be. And then we'll have a look at a couple of potential chip usages. I've been thinking quite a lot about the 3 times chip, and also for me personally using the wildcard. I think the wildcard is very much team dependent on what you want to do over the next couple of weeks and going forward and whatnot. So I think it's very team dependent, but I will discuss my thoughts on my own possibility of using a wildcard. And then also the 3 times DRS boost potential, because there's a little bit of chit chat about that online as well. So I'm going to try and cover that, and then we'll have a look at the kind of variations on the different teams that I'm actually looking to plug in and lock in. So yeah, let's start off with Spain. This is what I came out of. I maxed out the budget, not a single penny left in the bank going into Spain this weekend, which is potentially a bit of a nuisance going in. For example, if I wanted to make a simple switch of Carlos Sainz to Lewis Hamilton, I can't, because Hamilton costs 0.1 more than Sainz. Or if I wanted to just transfer out like a Tsunoda to a Gasly, again, I think it's 0.1, it might be 0.2, but I think it's just 0.1 difference there. So I can't just make those little tweaks, which potentially would make my team look a lot more handsome going into this weekend. So a bit frustrating, but there you go. I've maximised the budget, and it paid off nicely in Spain. 237 points. Lando, the DOTD, driver of the day, magnet. I genuinely think that the reason for him, it's not just because he's popular. I genuinely think it's just the wider F1 audience are just really happy that Verstappen's getting challenged, and he's been beaten a couple of times this season. And Lando Norris is that one in the McLaren that's taken it to Verstappen, and I think the wider audience that are voting for driver of the day just are happy to see Verstappen challenged in general. This is just my thoughts on it. Might be wrong, but this is kind of where I'm coming from. So yeah, I think Lando Norris, as long as he continues to chip away at Verstappen, get the odd win here or there, I think he's going to continue to pick up these driver of the day accolades. That is, unless the F1 fantasy frustrated managers can get on top and vote through some other people, but who knows. So yeah, Lando Norris fantastic for me in Spain. The budget guys were kind of as expected, very underwhelming, but that's they're there as filler effectively. I will say Yuki Tsunoda has been bleeding me drive points and value recently. I think his last really good weekend was back in Miami. In fact, we can't actually see it from here, can we? It's kind of annoying, but yeah. Let's have a quick look actually on F1 Fantasy Tools, because I think, where is he? Tsunoda. Yeah, Miami, USA. What was that, 5 weekends ago? Since then, he's scored 4.704. It's not good. And in fact, across the season, he's only actually had 3 really good weekends, to be fair. 11, 10, 23. So yeah, Tsunoda's kind of one on the chopping block, particularly if I am going to use the wild card. I can find it. He's basically been sat in my team because I haven't been able to transfer him out, because I've been too focused on shuffling my deck of expensive drivers. So Tsunoda is on the chopping block if the wildcard comes into play for sure. Guan Yu Zhou, I'm happy to have him there because he's good for overtakes, and the Saubers seem to be kind of okay at the moment. Zhou, not qualifying too well and pushing forward is pretty nice. And then the constructors, the Ferraris are pretty underwhelming. The way Fred Vasseur kind of worded it was because they qualified behind Mercedes, they were very, very similar. Pretty much on par with the Mercedes in terms of race pace. And if you remember, Leclerc was like just meters away from making that overtake on the last lap of George Russell towards the end there. So yeah, I do think that the Ferraris aren't just out of it. They had a shocker, obviously. They had a shocker. I think that's made it, everyone's got that in their mind. The shocker of Canada, and then a bit of a dip in Spain, and suddenly all the F1 fantasy managers are like trying to clear the Ferrari assets out of their team. I'm not sure that's the right way to go yet, but I am kind of, certainly thinking about chopping them as well, as we'll see as we get into the team selection shortly. But yeah, the Ferraris in Spain were fine. They scored okay. And we'll see how they go in FP1 and Sprint Quali to see if we want to continue to trust them. And then obviously we've got the Mercedes as well, who just continue to impress. A couple of back-to-back podiums now. Lewis, beaming smile in all his interviews after getting his first podium in, 14 races or something ridiculous. So yeah, Mercedes right up there again. I'm not quite on the level of Red Bull and McLaren, but they keep pushing, they keep sticking things on their car in terms of upgrades, and the Mercedes are certainly an exciting prospect, and it might be time to get a bit more involved in them, which is why I mentioned, I can't do a simple swap of Carlos Sainz to Lewis Hamilton. I've mentioned that because I've already been looking at how can I get more Mercedes assets in my team, because I think they're good for building budget as well as points. So we'll have a look at that again in a bit more detail as we go into team selection. So that's kind of where we're at from Spain. Let's just bring this back here, and then I'll load up the team, so we're ready to go with team selection shortly. But first of all, we're going to bring up the Ocon Gasly graphic slide, whatever you want to call it. There they are, Mr. Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly. Like I said, a bit of a talk of the town at the moment, and I do think that they are both actually quite viable options at the moment. At the beginning of the season, they were deemed to be driving the tractor. They were bringing up the rear all the time. They couldn't get an overtake. I remember watching the Grand Prix around Suzuka, and like the Alpines are just feeding everyone else overtakes. So I was just watching this, like as a non-owner of the people overtaking them, I was like, no, they're just letting everyone else get the overtakes because they're so slow. And they couldn't make an overtake. So maybe that's impacted, for example, Gasly only showing up as 11th in terms of overtakes this season, which isn't great when you're looking at your budget options. You want them to be able to be good at overtaken, because that's kind of 50% of where they score their points. They basically only get points from overtakes and positions gained, and very occasionally they'll get points for finishing like 8th, 9th or 10th or something like that. So that does worry me slightly in terms of bringing in Gasly. However, Gasly has got a reasonable record around Austria, so he is certainly one that I'm keeping my eye on. Overtake in terms of Ocon, he's actually been doing really well this season. In the top 25% of the grid there, in 5th position, and also in positions gained. So Ocon is quite appealing in that regard. The fact he's kind of hitting both categories there. He's fifth for both positions gained and overtakes, which is pretty appealing. However, the competition there is actually with the Hazards. In fact, if I close this down for a second. Close that down, go back to F1 Fantasy Tools and load up where the actual overtakes are going. Overtakes, Magnussen is just the king at the moment. It was maybe slightly helped out by Canada and the wet tyre choice there. But when we combine positions gained and overtakes across the season so far, it might help if I actually ranked it by average first. In fact, let's just take it back so you can see it there. So you can see both the Hazards are pretty good for overtakes, again kind of warped a little bit by Canada potentially, but Ocon's kind of up there as well, punching above his weight. Interesting as well that the Mercedes are kind of there. Mercedes are kind of interested in terms of overtakes as well, another appeal to the Mercedes whilst we're looking at it. But yeah, also in terms of positions gained and overtakes combined, the Alpines are kind of up there more or less. They're not quite in on terms of the likes of the overtake kings, Magnussen and Zhou. And it does concern me slightly if their qualifying is going to be as good as it was in Spain, because that obviously reduces the amount of positions gained that they have potential for. So if their qualifying is really good, if they do really well in the sprint quali, maybe we don't want to jump on them too much. We're kind of hoping they kind of qualify further back but show promise in FP1 to give us the trust that they can move forward, if that makes sense. So let's just hop it back 2 seconds, back to the slide again, so we can continue to kind of evaluate them in terms of their price and that. I think the price is fine, and it's pretty split between the two of them. I think Ocon at 10.1 for, is a bit more of a luxury for some people. For me personally, I'm looking more at Gasly. I think he's just kind of safer, a slightly safer option. Ocon does concern me slightly. Can see, for example, his average from the last 3 at 0.3. That's because of obviously his kind of crazy moment in Monaco where he smashed into Gasly as well. That's another thing. Like, these two on the track together does concern me. Can you imagine if you had both of them on your team and they qualify like 10th and 11th or something? You'd be really gritting your teeth and squirming around a little bit ahead of the race. So I think overall the Alpines are certainly interesting, but they are in direct competition with the likes of the Hazes, as we've seen on F1 Fancy Tools. That the Magnussen and Hulkenberg are certainly some strict competition there. And the last thing I just wanted to show you in terms of the Alpines is this graph, which I'll be honest, I don't think it really tells us a great deal, but I wanted to show you anyway. It's just a graph of fantasy points scored over the season so far, so you can see where the DNFs have happened with the big old troughs down there. But in general, I think you could argue that there is potentially a slight correlation going in an upwards trend there, so kind of interesting. And they've also kind of evenly matched each other in terms of scoring, apart from when the DNFs have happened. So again, evenly split. And I think out of the two of them, I kind of edging towards Gasly, maybe more because he's cheaper. And just in my head, he's a bit safer and also has quite a good record around Austria. So that's kind of where I'm at the moment. So let's hop it back to the team. This is my team coming out of Spain. I imagine it looks pretty similar to a lot of your teams as well. Maybe some people have a bit more Red Bull coverage, maybe with Verstappen in there, maybe a bit more the Mercedes coverage, or even a bit more McLaren. But there we go. I kind of got into bed with the Ferraris going into Spain. Didn't have the best time, to be honest, but we'll see what happens, like I say, in FP1 and Sprint Quali in terms of how they look compared to the likes of the Mercedes, McLarens and Red Bulls. Because if the Ferraris look great, then I'm very, very tempted to pretty much leave it as it is. I mean, if the Ferraris look great, I can't quite get to Leclerc without having to do the dreaded Logan Sargent, and I really, really, really don't want Logan Sargent in my team. It's just another DNF kind of waiting to happen. He's bleeding value every week, and he's got low potential for getting the 500,000 rise. I just don't want to get trapped with him, relying on the rest of my drivers and then getting trapped with this asset, which is hard to shift. All these other guys are similar sort of price. They're easier to move around, but when you drop down to this guy who's clearly not going to do very much, as far as I can see, I just don't like it. The only reason I would potentially go for this build is if the Ferraris do look particularly good, and in particular Charles Leclerc looks really good. Charles Leclerc, I don't know why I just said that, it sounded weird to me anyway. And then the potential of using a 3 times DRS boost, because I think the 3 times DRS boost hasn't really been chatted about too much in the F1 fantasy community as far as I can see. There's a few murmurs about it online, and I've thought about it quite a lot myself, because this time last year, a lot of us, I didn't actually use it last year, but a lot of other F1 fantasy managers used Austria for the 3 times. This season is just a little bit more tricky in terms of our budget. We haven't quite got the budget to put the best drivers in for that, because in my opinion, the best drivers would be Verstappen and Norris. That's where you're going to get the most points. You can argue either way, 3 times on Norris, 2 on Verstappen, or vice versa. It's kind of fairly interchangeable the way they're driving at the moment. But like I say, if the Ferraris look exceptional, then there's a potential for, looking at 3 times on Leclerc and 2 times on Norris for me. Or the other way around, like I say, 3 times on Norris and 2 on Leclerc. But I think I'm not quite heading down this route, but it's in my mind if the Ferraris, suddenly look incredible. I don't think that's going to happen, but obviously I'm open to that possibility. So that's kind of one build that I'm looking at. The other build, again, is swapping out kind of Tsunoda and Carlos Sainz and bringing in, again, very heavily dependent on sprint quali and everything, but kind of the man in form at the moment, which is Lewis Hamilton. And again, I'm kind of cut short a little bit from bringing in my favourites here, Magnussen and Gasly, who I think are kind of the pick of the bunch down here in this vicinity at the moment. But I can get a good sort of backup driver in terms of Nico Hulkenberg. And the Hazards are pretty good in a straight line. They're pretty good for overtakes. They're pretty good in the slow corners as well, which there's a couple of slow corners around here, around the Red Bull ring. So I do think that Hulkenberg has got the potential for a good race, and has in general got potential for a good race. And again, if the Mercedes look particularly strong, then this is a great option for me in terms of building budget, because Lewis Hamilton has gone up a couple of million in the last couple of races, 0.3 before, and I believe before that he went up like a million each time. So yeah, Lewis Hamilton's kind of up there. I did also notice, I don't remember the exact finishing percentages of driver of the day, but Lewis Hamilton was kind of up there in the top three. I remember it popping up on the screen. Lando Norris was on like 28% or something, and then you had Verstappen and Hamilton around sort of 12-13%, if I remember correctly. I haven't looked back at it, but just kind of remembering back to the race. So Lewis Hamilton, maybe he's got driver of the day in his pocket coming up sometime soon, especially with Silverstone around the corner. I'm thinking Lewis is an absolute monstrosity when it comes to Silverstone, and if the Mercedes continue to improve, then Lewis Hamilton could be not only a points machine but also gaining that budget. And I think the budget is going to be important for further down the season, because if I'm not using the 3 times DRS boost this week, then I'm likely to use it further down the line in either COTA or Qatar, potentially COTA, where I have hopefully a bit more budget. I need a couple more million, because if I like try and get in where are we try and get in Max Verstappen alongside Norris, even if I wanted Logan Sargent in here, I'm still like 5 million short of that. It's kind of insane. I'd have to drop down the constructors to enable to get to this. There might be some crazy team out there which can afford this at the moment. If you've got like 5 million or 5.2 million more than me at the moment, you could get to this. But I think realistically, for me personally, it's just too much of kind of warping my team in order to, because I don't want to warp my team to get these two guys in, because to enable to get them in, I probably have to take a -10 and also drop the constructors down to like the Hazes if I trust them, and then if I want like a Gasly or a Magnussen or whatever, and I'll kind of go with a team like this, take a -10 and then 3 times Verstappen and 2 times Norris. That's another option as well if I really want to use it this weekend, but I just think it's a bit too much. I don't want to take -10s kind of unnecessarily, and I don't want to force it when there's opportunity down the line. Like I say, COTA and Qatar look like good options down the line. Should be quite dry, safe races, and we should hopefully be able to build budget. And when I say building budget, that's why I'm kind of looking at this Lewis Hamilton team. Again, trusting in the Has. The only downside to this that I can really see, and it is kind of pretty much the only downside. Well, there's a couple actually. One downside is there's no Red Bull coverage whatsoever. The other downside is if Ferrari don't look quite strong, then this doesn't look particularly good. You want to maximise the points as much as possible in the sprint weekend. So, but yes, I'm also very conscious of continuing to try and grow my budget, because it does hurt when you're 0.1 short, 0.2 short, or even a couple of million short. If you can gain those millions where you can, or half a millions where you can, I think that's still a great way to play the game, and I think you'll reap the benefits further down the line. Like I say, when we're looking at the 3 times DRS, I think it's probably more suited to something like COTA. Maybe in COTA with Lewis, within a fully upgraded Mercedes, it'll still be significantly cheaper, I'd imagine, than Verstappen, because once if he gets to 25 million, his price increases will slow up. So I think that come COTA, we could be looking at Verstappen Hamilton. Again, I'm having flashbacks to last year, because that's exactly what I did, and then Lewis obviously got the disqualification. I'm sorry to bring back COTA bad memories to people, but that's something I'm potentially looking at down the line as well. So the reason why I'm talking so much about 3 times DRS, because like I say, it's Austria, it's a sprint weekend. Chips are going to get thrown onto the table this weekend. That's why I've heavily considered it, but the more I think about it, the more I think maybe it's not quite right, unless what happens in sprint quali kind of points in that direction. So this is certainly a build I'm interested in, depending on how strong the Mercedes and the Ferraris look. So we'll move on from that anyway. The other option I'm looking at, again, is using another chip, which is using the Wildcard, and this Wildcard will come into play pretty much on one condition, that the McLarens and the Red Bulls look immense. And this obviously does, when I show you, go completely against the budget building bonanza which I've just talked about, but basically I'm going to strip it right back, and it does the budget building potential here is pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I'm really just going for the points if I do wildcard into this. I'm probably looking at something like this, and then a Hulkenberg. This would probably be my wildcard team, like I say, on the condition that the Red Bulls, including Perez ideally, look like they're going to be dominant alongside the McLarens. Piastri needs to pick it up from Spain as well. He didn't have a good weekend. If he picks it back up again, I can trust the McLarens a bit more. and then 2 times Norris, and this will be my wildcard team. It gets rid of the deadwood in terms of Bottas and Tsunoda that kind of draining me a little bit, and hopefully gives me a bit more potential in terms of the Hazards. That said, the Hazards potentially not such a great option moving further along to Silverstone, where there's a lot of high speed, where the Hazards seem to struggle with. But then you can always fiddle about these, bringing in another Alpine or something, for example. So yes, that's kind of where I'm at in terms of wildcard potential. And then I don't really know what else to say about that. I guess what else I can say is basically, I don't really want to go down that route. But if I feel like it's clear in terms of McLarens and Red Bulls, I will go down that route. But it does, it would tie up my wild card, and it's hard to kind of get out of it going back into Silverstone the following week. The other option I'm looking at, there's so many options. This is why I said at the beginning of the video that I'm like sweltering with the heat and the stress. But the other option I'm kind of looking at is bringing in the Red Bull, and that frees up 15.4 million. So I could, if I'm feeling particularly bold and Stroll looks okay, try and get a bit more value out of Lance Stroll, because he is again kind of the overtake king. If we flick it back here, positions gained as well. He's combined positions gained and overtake. Stroll is in their 4th position there, although the Aston Martins do seem to be in a bit of a downwards trajectory somewhat. But in terms of pure overtakes in both sprints and Grand Prix, Stroll is P2, and that's considering that Hulkenberg, Magnussen have also had that Canada boost where they had the wet tyre against everyone's intermediate, and they just overtook half the field. So even despite that, Stroll is looking particularly good in terms of overtake. So I don't think he's a complete write-off at the moment, despite Aston Martin's kind of going off the radar. So I could make a couple of quick transfers and quite happily go in with a team like this. This has got a really nice balance to it. It's got some potential for some price gains. Like I say, if Stroll has another good week in terms of overtakes, if the Mercedes continue to excel and impress, then Mercedes could go up, like $1 million or whatever. And it also combines the big points potential of Red Bull and Lando Norris. Because if we throw it back to F1 Fantasy Tools, actually, let's put it back to all the points and we'll have a look at the constructors. Look at Red Bull in Spain, 82 points, and that's with Perez. I think he scored 19, didn't he? He scored 19 points, I want to say. Yeah, 19 points in Spain, and that's with a bad race. What did he qualify with the penalty? He started like P8, P11 and finished like P8 or whatever it was. I can't remember, to be honest. But regardless, Perez in real life terms had a bad race. He's in a Red Bull, and he had some trouble at a couple of moments, like overtaking Gasly, for example, in the Alpine tractor. Although obviously it's not quite the tractor anymore, but still, Perez is just really, really struggling. See the back-to-back DNFs, and even before that, the 11-pointer. Perez is really, really off form, but he's kind of picked up a bit in Spain in terms of fantasy output. If he can just avoid DNFing, ideally, if you're going with the Red Bull constructor, you want to get him back in the top 5. If he did get in the top 5, combine that with Verstappen and combine that with Red Bull's pit stop, just immensity. In fact, again, let's just kind of have a look at where are we? Fastest pit stop points down here. Look at the Red Bulls; they're just absolutely dominant, averaging 10 points a week. It's just a given, pretty much. Just 10 points a week, easy peasy points, more or less. And look at that in Japan, China, 18 pointers. They wrapped up all 3 of their pit stops. They're probably due a disaster at some point. They're probably due it. Okay, they're probably due like a bolt to get stuck, and I can't get out. I'll probably jinx it now. I'm going to mess it up for everyone, but sorry about that. But yeah, I think in general, the Red Bulls have high potential this weekend, which is why I'm kind of looking at a kind of a balanced team like this. And if I didn't trust Lance Stroll, for example, then I would be looking at someone like an Ocon, a Magnussen, or possibly the Gasly. Kind of take your pick from those guys according to how FP1 and Sprint quality goes. I am tempted to Gasly because I kind of want to keep potentially keep Gasly going forward, like Silverstone onwards. I could also go Magnussen in there, but I'm not 100% sure I kind of want him going onwards. Plus, he's kind of close to the race ban, something to think about. But basically, the bottom line is, let's bring back Stroll for now, although I'm not convinced by him. What I'm trying to say is that I like this team quite a lot. It unfortunately means I have to keep the Deadwood. I'm keeping Bottas, I'm keeping Tsunoda, which I don't really want on my team. But, maybe Tsunoda had a good race, a good points haul. His last good points haul was the last sprint in Miami. So maybe another sprint comes along. Maybe Tsunoda can impress. So I'd be pretty happy with a team like this. And those are kind of, I say those are my thoughts at the moment, but I know there's probably about, 4 or 5 different selections I've gone through, a couple of different chip usages I've potentially going to use, but that's where my head is at the moment. My phone, the screenshots I take of my phone when I'm looking and deciding on different team structures and whatnot, is just full of screenshots of F1 fantasy teams, which is it's not been like that for a little while. You know, I get the odd one, I have a little think and have a little play, but it's just, yeah, my phone is just full up with screenshots because it's just great at the moment. There's so much opportunity for variation and trying things out, and trying to push forward into that top 1,000 personally. Just push forward as high as I can. And yeah, it's about whether I want to focus entirely on the points, for example, wildcarding with the McLaren Red Bull team. If I want to focus more on the budget, or I go with the Lewis Hamilton team and keep the Ferrari constructor, try and focus on building the budget. It completely depends if the Ferraris actually still look strong. It depends on so many different things, but thankfully we've got FP1. Thankfully we've got sprint qualifier, and I will narrow down my decision and decide after that. So yeah, I'm going to breathe now and probably going to have a shower because I'm just like, whew. But yeah, thanks very much for listening to me. I think I've covered everything I want to cover. So yeah, we'll kind of leave it there, I guess. And good luck this weekend. Happy to hear your thoughts in the comments below, or head over to Twitter at PopmanF1 and give me a tweet. So yeah, catch you soon. Bye for now and good luck. Have a lovely weekend. Bye bye.